so many things to say in response to this question, and it's a really common assumption. It's one that I had for a long time. I didn't become a Christian until I was about 19, and really that's the thought that I would have had, that in some way all of these religions are reconcilable. All of them are basically saying the same thing, that we should be a good person, and therefore we can all just think about it the same way. I think in reality, the longer you look at the different religions and the deeper you look into them, the more you realize how different they are. One of the ways that Amy began to touch on is the extent to which there's historical evidence for different religions. And I think here's one place where Christianity is in a great position. When you look at the evidence for the resurrection, which Amy began to speak about, we're talking about sources which are really early historical sources, and we're talking about eyewitness testimony. That's something that you really don't see in other religions, having to do with the founding miracle of the religion. I mean, basically, in Christianity, you have Jesus who has these followers, and they believe that he's the Messiah, which means they believe that he's going to rise to power, he's going to become this king, and he's going to rule over everyone. All of a sudden, this person that they put their hope in dies. That should have been end of movement. Then, all of a sudden, you have this eruption of Christianity. And really early on, in fact, if you want to look at it later, 1 Corinthians 15, the first few verses of that chapter, it's conceded by not just Christian scholars, but even by the foremost atheist scholars, that that text, which talks about all of the individual different appearances that Jesus made after his death, including to more than 500 people, that text is from almost immediately after the resurrection of Christ. So whereas 100 years ago, a lot of people would have said, well, this is just a legendary development. It developed over time. Almost no one would say that anymore. And so there's this huge historical gap in Christianity between what should have been the movement-ending death of Jesus and then the eruption of Christianity. How do we fill that gap? Historically, Christians fill it with the resurrection. If you don't fill it with the resurrection, the gap still remains. And I remember as an undergraduate student, as I was seeking through this, and in my process of becoming a Christian, I went to two of the foremost New Testament scholars of that time, Elaine Pagels and John Gager. And I challenged them both with this problem. Because I thought to myself, okay, these Christians are saying one thing to me, but surely intelligent atheists, especially ones who research in this area, must have other conclusions. And one of them told me that as a historian, they were not interested in that question. That was the extent that they were willing to say. The other one sort of glanced towards a sort of mass hallucination hypothesis, which she wasn't committed to herself, it didn't seem like. Mass hallucinations are not things that are attested to in the psychological literature. They're individual experiences. And also in Christianity, we have not just one mass hallucination, but all sorts of different appearances of Jesus after he rose from the dead. So historically, we have this sort of evidence. What I just did for you right there in that little snapshot, it's very difficult to do for any other religion, to give that sort of historical argument for the faith. And then first and foremost, just to say one other thing, we could say lots of things about the differences of religions, but one other thing, just have to mention the word grace. Just unmerited love. Love that is not dependent on whether you're having a good day or a bad day, a good season or a bad season. I mean, to me, that is just the most amazing thing about the Christian faith. A God who loves sinners, a God who does not love us dependent on how obedient we have been. And that is radically unique. I had the privilege of sitting with my best friend's father a few months ago as he was dying from cancer. And he allowed me to share about the Christian faith with him. And he shared with me that his understanding of the Christian faith had always been try to do more good than bad and hope at the end of the day that you've done enough. If you have, you'll be going to a good place. If you haven't, you'll be going to a bad place. And it was such a privilege as a Christian to be able to say to him, actually, that's not the message of Christianity. That's not what makes us right with God. What makes us right with God is not something that we do, not something we ever could do, but something that Jesus already did in full. And the difference, I think, between Christianity and every other religion is that every other religion would have had nothing to say to my friend's father on that day, other than to say, you're right. and perhaps you haven't done enough, and there is reason to be scared. I could offer a hope that was based on grace because of what Jesus has already done, and praise God he accepted that. So I think that's one of the key differences.